Inaviolentnature is the newest Shudder horror film to hit theaters. When the trailer dropped for this film, it was getting a lot of buzz, and it has a lot of hype going into this week at the box office. But ultimately, is this film even worth the hype, and should you be checking it out? Well, stick around, and let's talk about it. Inaviolentnature is the resurrection, rampage, and retribution of an undead monster in a remote wilderness, unleashing an iconic new killer after a locket is removed from a collapsed fire tower that entombed its rotting corpse. The film stars the killer himself, Barrett, and was directed by Kris Nash, and this is his directorial debut, though he has had a short film in the ABCs of Death 2, which I've never seen. Inaviolentnature, when I first saw the trailer for this film, the first thought that came to mind is, oh, I'm really intrigued because we're going to go inside a killer's POV type of vision, and I was like, there's a lot you can actually do with this, though the trailer seemed it was very limited and it was just showing the killer kind of walking around, and that had me a little bit worried going into this film, especially with the fact that it's a Shudder film because it is a lower budget film, so you kind of know that there's going to be limitations within a Shudder film, so my expectations were not necessarily overly high for this film, but positives coming out of this film is the way that it's shot with the nature shots. There's a lot of that here, and you get a lot of that natural habitat type vibe here. So you have the woods here, you're in the middle of nowhere, you hear the rustling of the leaves, you hear the birds chirping, snapping of twigs, the bees are buzzing, you have the bodies of water, and a lot of different nature shots within the trees, and just creative shots that are really just portrayed throughout this film. They're done really well, and if you really like nature, you're going to absolutely love the nature shots in this film. The overall violence and the practical effects in here are done really well. The kills in here are very violent and very much in your face, and you're kind of looking away a little bit going, ooh, that's gruesome. A lot of the kills in here, they're just like that. For instance, there's one kill where I don't think I've ever seen on screen where somebody is just beat to death and bludgeoned in their head. I think he probably hit that person probably 40-50 times, and it's a very gruesome watch, and a lot of these kills are like that. So if you're not really into a lot of violence, this is definitely not going to be the film for you. But I really did enjoy the fact that they tried to be inventive with the kills and tried to show some really good practical effects as well. So I give the film a lot of props for just doing that as a whole. While I can praise the practical effects and the violence that this film really does bring to the table, there's a lot of negatives with this film, and let's start off first with the aspect ratio. Now, be aware when you go into this film is filmed into a square box with the black bars actually cut off. And after realizing that this is how the film is going to be for the duration of the film, my first thought was, is this really worth it to see in a theater? Because you could easily watch it at home on the Shudder streaming service. And I hate saying that because I really like to support Shudder and I want people to go out and support indie horror, but when you're reducing that aspect ratio to just a little square box, it seems like it's not really worth it to see on a big screen. Though I kind of understand why it was done, because I think it was trying to be more so an intimate experience for the audience to have that POV view of the killer and that narrow-minded view of the killer in just a little square box. So then again, I kind of understand why it was actually done. Now the story itself, it follows the killer waking up in a pile of leaves. We see him get up and we see him start to take a hike through the woods. You hear the rustling of the leaves and twigs, and there is no soundtrack whatsoever, and we are looking at the back of his head as he wanders through the wilderness and he comes across random people and he kills those random characters, which gets into my point about the characters in this film. A lot of the characters are just spewing nonsense dialogue that adds no value to the story whatsoever, and when you see these characters, you see them so fast, they get killed off so fast, that there's not any merit to those characters, so there's nobody to really root for, so you're just watching this killer just go on a killing spree. And the fact that he is doing this killing spree, I felt like a lot of times there was no suspense or drama or build up in between the kills. You're just watching the back of his head as he just wanders through this forest, and it gets a little bit boring, because I think that if you could actually have some flashbacks of the killer, maybe a backstory as to why he's actually doing this, or maybe where he came from, I think that this film could have been spiced up a little bit to really get that actual reaction from the audience, because there's not really a lot of reaction you can really have with this other than, ooh, that kill is really gruesome. You can't really root for any characters, and because the film is very narrow in its structure and it doesn't really have a lot to really go into the POV view of the killer himself, I think it's a little bit stale. I think that if you look back at Friday the 13th, obviously Jason, he was bullied and he was at Camp Crystal Lake. And so he has that backstory. So you understand why he's actually going around and killing people at Camp Crystal Lake. With this killer, he's just going around killing a bunch of people, and you have no perspective of the killer himself. Was he bullied? Where did he come from? Where was his family? We don't know any of that. And that is where the film really lacks in its writing and could really been spiced up to really just make it a much better film. The editing in this film I was not a fan of. Now, I said that I did like the nature shots, but I do think at times some shots are just a little bit too prolonged. For instance, there is this one shot where we're literally looking at a tree for about 3 minutes and we hear the characters talking in the background, or you'll see a very long shot where we're just seeing a bunch of trees, where I think some of those shots could have been cut down. We have one scene where a bunch of campers are around a campfire and they're telling a story, and we see the characters in a circular motion because the camera just sits there and it goes in a circular motion really slow, and it does this for about a good 5 minutes of the film. There is a portion of this film where it switches gears. There is a part where the killer actually kills someone off, and it switches gears to another character where we barely know who she actually is, and there's no character development, like I said. So when it actually switches to that point, it feels very pointless because the last 20 minutes of the film is just really following her character. We hear a monologue from another character that we had never really known anything about. I felt like after that kill actually happened, that was about the 65-minute mark, you can just get up and leave because there's nothing of any value by the time the film actually crosses that mark. You're not learning a lot more about the characters, and you're just having really boring dialogue, of which that's not what we came to actually pay for to go check out this movie. I felt like the killer there was really left hanging, and the way that they just chose to wrap up this film, I was so frustrated with it. I think this was probably top 5 worst endings of the year. I just sat there and was very puzzled and frustrated, and I just honestly was just really mad at the fact that we just switched point of views, went to a character we knew nothing about, and then the film just abruptly ends. Like, come on. I mean, this was supposed to be a much better film. I feel like the only reason why I wouldn't say this is the worst of the year is because it does have some elements that I really did like with the kills, and I think the mysteriousness of this killer is very interesting. But if they just would give him a little bit more backstory and give us a little bit more reason to care, I think a lot more people would actually like this film, and I could definitely see where this film would get a lot better scores. I just feel like there was a missed opportunity here, and I felt like it could have been a lot better film. So as far as a score for this film, I would give it a 2 out of 5. I think overall, it's something that I'll never watch again, but I can sit there and appreciate the practical effects and the kills that actually went into this, because it's definitely a violent film and there's some gruesome kills. But overall, for me, it's just not a movie that I would rewatch. I just think that there are times where it's just a little bit boring, and I felt like we needed a little bit more suspense and things to really spice up the film just a little bit more. What did you guys think about Inaviolentnature? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Did you just think it was kind of meh? If you haven't checked it out yet, are you going to check it out when it comes to Shudder? Or are you going to check it out in a theater? Or are you going to skip it altogether? Leave any and all comments down below, and thank you guys for watching.